is guys will be like, dude, whenever I go for an armbar, I'm hurting my balls. Like I'm getting my balls caught in the armbar. I used to be the same thing. You know why? It's because you're using your balls as a finishing fulcrum, and that is not what you should fucking do.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Alpra.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast. It's everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. I am back from a weekend away. Me and my family went up to a place in BC called Shuswap, and I did a lot of water sports and ATVing. It was a lot of fun. Now we're back, and I am getting ready for a super fight that I'm having later on this week. I will discuss that at the end of the show. Today we're going to discuss arm bars. This is a topic that is vast and one that I've wanted to have on the show for a long time. And before we get into this massive topic that probably deserves its own series or multiple part episodes, I would like to remind you to please like, share, and subscribe to the show. Leave a review if you can, and check out the links in the bottom if you want to support the show. It is greatly appreciated. Okay, arm bars, also known as jujigatame. Jujigatame is a fancy way of saying arm bars. If you watch John Danaher DVDs like myself, or if you have trained in judo before, you will probably use Japanese words. This is me spraying my cat right now. Japanese words, and jujigatame basically just means cross shoulder hold or lock, right? Gatame means hold. And basically this is what we know to be the traditional armbar position, where we are lying like a cross, like a letter T. And this is a very wide topic. Like I said, it's such a vast topic in jiu-jitsu. It's one of the main submissions that we know. It's one of the first submissions we teach beginners and kids. And I'm going to do my best to talk about arm bars and jujigatames and try and get it within an hour and give you guys information that will be new to you if you've already been using arm bars, or if you're a beginner, hopefully some concepts and ideas that will make your arm bars more effective. But like I said, this topic is so vast that it probably does deserve its own series or multiple episodes, because I just can't talk about arm bars enough in it within an hour. But I'm going to do my best, guys. So I just wanted to talk about the armbar as what was my favorite submission when I first started jiu-jitsu. A lot of people talk about like the rear naked choke being their favorite submission or the most effective submission for them. Guys, I'm not going to lie. I don't have the greatest rear naked choke. I much rather favor joint locks. And yes, I know there is that cliche of, well, if you're in a fight and you armbar somebody, they can still fight. You know, you break their arm, they could still potentially fight you. If you choke them out, they can't fight back. And this is true. Obviously, I'm proficient in strangles as well, but like arm bars and joint locks have always just come so natural to me. And I just wanted to mention that, like, if you can see the camera right now, my fingers are bending all different ways. Like I got pretty bad hands. I've never been known for having great grips. And I've noticed that has really affected my gi performance. Just not having good grips and not being able to use like the small muscle groups in my body. But I am able to use large muscle groups like my legs, my core, my hips, my shoulders. I've been able to use these muscle groups to great effect. And I think that's why I favor a submission such as the armbar and other joint locks, is because it relies on large muscle groups, such as your core and your legs and your hips. So I think that's really why the armbar was kind of my first favorite submission. It was one of the first submissions that I realized, like, oh, I can get this move effectively and I can repeat it on a consistent basis in the training room and in competition. And I just sort of gravitated towards arm locks from the beginning. And still to this day, I feel very confident attacking arm locks. Whereas there's other positions like the back where it's not really one of my favorite attack positions anymore. For those of you who've listened to the show recently, of course, you know that I've been transitioning more to the mount, and obviously I have a good leg lock game, but arm bars are really, I think, one of my best submission systems that I can use. And I really do think is because it's, the fact that it calls on large muscle groups as opposed to smaller muscle groups. That's why I've never really been excellent at gi strangles. It's never really been a part of my game to do gi strangles, but, I still do love a good collar choke from time to time. let's talk about the mechanics of an armbar from a conceptual point of view. So, you know, if you're not aware of what jiu-jitsu is, it's just a game of levers, right? And we think about attacking our partner's body. We think about arms and legs, or 4 levers sticking out of a box. And the head is also the end of the lever to the spine, right? And when you start thinking about jiu-jitsu as a game of levers, things become a lot easier to understand. It becomes easier to understand how to control parts of your partner's body when you think about just manipulating levers. And arm bars are no different. Arm bar is just a form of lever control. And what we need to be doing is applying force into the middle of the lever, which would be your partner's elbow, using a fulcrum. In this case, generally the fulcrum is your hip, although with different types of arm bars, which we're going to discuss in this episode, the fulcrum will change. So the fulcrum is the part of your body which you're going to use to pivot a lever on, or in this case, to break a lever on. A fulcrum in an everyday setting would be like a teeter-totter. It would be the center of the teeter-totter. Or if we're looking at, say, a door handle, you know, one of those door handles that has a lever sticking out of it, it would be where the lever meets the door. This is the fulcrum. This is the area where the lever can pivot. And so when it comes to actually breaking someone's arm, we need to have pressure on both ends of the lever, both the long end. This is going to be the end where you are making your grips on, whatever grip that may be. And we'll talk about a lot of them today in the episode. And the base end of the lever, which is going to be at the shoulder. So we must immobilize both the long and short end of the lever, meaning we must immobilize the hand and wrist, and we must immobilize our partner's shoulder girdle and head, and, you know, to be even more effective, the far shoulder as well. While we're applying, you know, let's just because we all know what a basic juji is, a basic armbar position, you know, the spider web position, whatever you want to call it. Some call it a top side armbar. You can picture this position, right? Where it's shaped like a T and I'm attacking your arm. If I'm applying pressure down on the shoulder and the wrist, I am applying pressure up on your elbow. And so just like anything in jiu-jitsu, when we're trying to control a portion of our partner's body, we're using wedges. And all joint locks require opposing forces of wedges. So in this case, generally the way that my legs are positioned around my partner's shoulders are going to be either knees pinching together, or you could also think about it as legs somewhat scissoring, and creating these opposing wedges so that your partner's arm and shoulder girdle are locked in place. And then again, like I said, your hands in a classic Juji Gatame would be controlling your partner's the long end of the lever, which would be the wrist, and ideally the thumb to prevent rotation. More on that later. And if you can do all this, then you can actually apply tremendous breaking power to your partner's arm. You can completely isolate the elbow and break it in half, as Gordon says. So these are the basic mechanics of Juji Gatame, the cross shoulder hold, or what we know as the traditional arm bar. Remember that you're just like in a leg lock situation. Your legs are in a leg lock situation would be the ashigarami. The ashigarami is what creates control over the short end of the lever and also your opponent's knee. So your partner's hip and knee are controlled with your legs, and then your hands create the finishing grip, whatever type of submission you're applying, whether it be heel hook or ankle lock. And I always tell people that are just learning leg locks, I'm like, you know how to do an armbar, right? Most of them are, you know, at this point, they're like white belts or even blue belts. And they're like, yeah. And I say, well, it's no different from a leg lock is no different from an arm lock, right? You would never apply an arm lock with your legs completely, you know, splayed open and completely loose. There's just going to be no arm lock, right? Of course, everyone understands that. And then I say, okay, well, leg locks are no different. All it requires is wedges around the short end of the lever while we're manipulating the long end of the lever. And so understand that your legs, when you're applying an armbar, are going to be providing the control needed to actually immobilize your partner's shoulder, and that will allow you to now apply pressure into the elbow. If the shoulder is not immobilized, then the elbow will be able to move and relieve pressure. So once we can immobilize the shoulder, that is when the elbow can break. And this is, some people call it, I know my brother has mentioned on BJJ Mental Models, he calls it the 3-joint rule. And this is the idea of immobilizing the joint above the joint you're trying to attack. So if I was going to do an ankle lock, I need to at least have immobilization of my partner's knee. If I'm going to apply a knee bar, I need to have a mobilization of my partner's hip, and so on. You guys get the fucking idea. So my hands are going to equal the grips that I'm going to be using. They're going that whatever grip I like to use for arm bars, that's what my hands are going to be doing to the long end of the lever, and my legs are going to be manipulating my partner's shoulder girdle, controlling the short end of the lever. And then my hip, generally for classic Jiu-Jitsu, is going to be the fulcrum, where I'm going to break my opponent's arm. Let's talk about the rule of thumb. And this is the idea of controlling your partner's rotation. And again, so many parallels between arm locks and leg locks, because if you think about it, they really are, it's just a form of lever control. We have rotational submissions such as Kimuras and Americanas and omoplatas, and then we have linear submissions such as arm bars. And in leg locks, the parallel to that would be, rotational submissions such as heel hooks and toe holds, and then linear submissions such as knee bars and ankle locks, right? So generally, whenever somebody is defending a heel hook, they're going to expose themselves to an ankle lock. And anytime somebody defends an ankle lock, just by kicking their foot straight and straightening their leg, they generally open themselves up to a heel hook because now their leg is 90 degrees and they've exposed themselves. So it's kind of the same way in an arm bar situation. For me to Kimura my partner's arm, I would need to have it bent somewhat at 90 degrees. But if they straighten their arm, we've all been in this situation where we're in side control trying to Kimura someone and they straighten their arm. And it's like, okay, I can't do a Kimura anymore because they've taken away my ability to create that, what Rob would call the ratchet effect on my partner's arm. When their arm is bent, it's easier to manipulate their arm as a lever. But when they straighten their arm, we now can apply a linear submission, an arm bar. It's very hard for me to hit a rotational submission on my partner when he straightens his arm like this, right? But this will expose my partner to armbar possibilities. And so we can play this dilemma, if you know this combination from side control where we attack a Kimura, an Americana, and an armbar, as a trilemma, this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So the rule of thumb is where we are attacking our opponent's arm with the armbar. We always want to make sure that we're in some way controlling our partner's thumb, so that they're not able to just do what's known as a running escape or a hitchhiker escape, where they turn their arm, they bend it, and now they're running away, right? And so this is a pretty easy rule to understand. My favorite way to control my partner's arm when I'm doing just a standard bridging finish is going to be to just do like a bro hand. I can't do it to myself because I don't have two right hands, but when you do a bro handshake and your hands lock and you're grabbing your partner by the meat of the palm of their hand. And then my other hand, I like to grab the wrist. And from here, you have tremendous control over the rotation of your partner's arm. Now, this I find to be the ideal way to control someone's arm to finish a standard Jiu-Jitsu with a bridging finish. Again, we're going to discuss bridging finishes versus pressing finishes in a moment. So that's the grip that I prefer for standard Jiu-Jitsu. Let's also discuss this concept. This is the idea of speed versus control. So some arm bars are going to be based around speed and surprise. And surprise is a fantastic element in jiu-jitsu in general. I think at the highest level, it's actually crucial to be able to attack your opponent with surprise and catch them off guard, because they're so at the highest level, it can be so hard to submit people throughout control. Everybody knows the moves that we're trying to go through for the most part, but if you can catch your opponent off guard or off balance them and catch them in a submission, this would be like a speed-based version of a submission. Whereas a control-based version of a submission is where you control them throughout a series of steps and they know what's happening, but yet they can't stop it because your wedges and your control is so good. So an example of this would be, okay, a control-based armbar would be like, I have you mounted and I get a double underhook. Then I get your arms over your head completely extended. I move into S mount. I slowly transition to S mount and you try and move, but there's just no room to wiggle. Your arms are completely crossed and you're all bunched up. And then, I step over your head and finish. Be a control-based armbar, but a speed-based armbar would be like, like how some gyms teach white belts on day one. They teach them to sit on their opponent's stomach and then just spin, and their arm is just dangling there, and we can just wrap our legs around our opponent's arm. It's never going to fucking work at the highest level. Works great for kids, actually, to be honest, but it would never work at the highest level because there's just no wedging that goes on. And so that would be like a speed-based version of an armbar. Now, a speed-based version of an armbar that would be effective would be like, okay, I'm playing spider guard, trying to play guard. My opponent's defending well, and then I hit like a balloon sweep type movement, get him up in the air. He's completely out of balance. He's not connected with the floor in any way. He's elevated, and then I spin underneath and I extend the arm and catch it. And that would be like an effective speed-based armbar that could work at the highest levels, right? So we could apply armbars with speed, where we just throw our hips up and hope that we catch it. Not the highest level or highest percentage way to do an armbar. Or we could do a control-based armbar like an S mount, or even like a top lock, where we climb up our partner's shoulders, isolate the shoulders, and then we can eventually throw the leg over sequentially, step by step, and still have a high degree of control. Okay. So always differentiate the two when we're teaching arm bars to our students. Let's also talk about arm bars from top and bottom. Arm bars can be applied from so many different positions, so many different angles, to the point where like the eco guys, I know Greg hates the term, he doesn't talk about like arm bars or this type of arm bar, that type of arm bar. I think he just calls them arm locks. And, he doesn't have names for these specific arm bars like John Danaher does. Because he says, there's so many different variations that can happen. It's so, you can't say that one arm bar is the same as the other, right? And I understand that. That's true. There's always different variations, but there is arm bars from top and arm bars from bottom, right? So if arm bars from top would be like classic Juji Gatame position, spider web position, whatever you want to call it. Armbar from bottom would be like from the guard, right? And the general idea when we are attacking arm bars is we want to be above our opponent if we can. If we can get them into that top side armbar position where our head is higher than their head, I would say the chances of you armbarring your opponent are much higher, because they're flat on their back and they would now have to bridge to get back on top of you and start to pull their arm out. I would say an armbar from the top position presents different issues for the bottom player. The bottom player now has to focus on keeping their hips up so they can maintain good attachment to their opponent. A really good rule of thumb when you're applying armbars from the guard is getting your hips up so much that the spaces behind your knees are filled with your opponent's head and back, right? We don't have these gaps behind our knees where we don't have that solid connection. And I know a landmark that Gordon and Danaher talk about a lot is when you're throwing up armbars from guard, is get your knees above your opponent's ear. I think these little landmarks that Danaher has are so cool because they just like, you remember that, you know what I mean? You hear something like that and you remember that. And I think that those details are very, very useful, especially for someone who's trying to sort of file moves away in their mind. It's better instead of memorizing how to do 101 moves, just memorize, a couple of concepts. And now you can sort of, again, using the eco terms, self-organize your way to attacking these arm locks, as long as you have these particular concepts that are parallel to, a wide variety of arm locks. And that is a good one, right? Always having the space behind your knees filled with your opponent's body and head, and getting your knees above your opponent's ear. So top arm bars, we want to have our head above our opponents, keeping their head down. Bottom arm bars from the guard, we want to have our hips up. And you're gonna encounter arm bars throughout 360 degrees when you're attacking your opponent. So it's good to think about these things. Another age-old question: should we cross our legs in an armbar, or should we have our legs open? And the general consensus that I've heard is you should have your legs crossed if you're on the top side armbar, or you could have your legs crossed. I'm not going to say should, because you can play open legs as well. And you should have your legs open when you're attacking a bottom side armbar, right? When you're from the guard, legs should be open. And the reason for this is because you can manipulate your opponent's head better. And just like all upper body submissions, like omoplatas, kimuras, armbars, they have this in common. If your opponent can posture up and gain head height, the submission starts to fall apart, right? You start to lose that connection with their upper body. And so a big focus for any athlete attacking upper body submissions from the bottom position should be, how do I keep my opponent's head down? That is going to be a super important concept when we're attacking these types of submissions. And so when we have our legs crossed from the bottom position, it's harder for me to manipulate my partner's head position Generally, it makes it easier for them to do things like stacking you and bunching you up while you're on the bottom, which makes it hard for you to finish submissions. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about how we can still finish submissions when we're getting stacked in a moment. But when we're on top, it's not the biggest deal when we cross our legs, because now we have really good control over our partner's far shoulder as well. So let's just isolate these two for a second. Let's say I'm on the bottom and my legs are crossed. It's going to be harder for me to push my partner's head away and chop down. There's a saying in any physical activity, really. I know I've heard it in Jiu Jitsu. I've heard it in hockey. If you manipulate your opponent's head, the body will follow, right? And this is the same thing when we're applying submissions from the bottom, like an armbar, and our partner wants to stack us head over head. If we can use our legs to chop down on our partner's head, it's going to be hard for them to now get that head overhead position. And generally, anytime we point our toes down from the armbar position, that's where their head's going to go. And we want to think about manipulating the crown of our opponent's head. So I don't chop down on the neck, right? I chop down at the crown of the head, the end of the lever, because that is going to allow me to steer my opponent away from me and finish these arm bars, right? Now, from the top position, we can kind of play both ways. We could play open legs leaning to the left, I guess instead of saying left or right, we could say leaning towards the head or leaning towards the feet. So we could lean one way or the other with open legs, usually with one hand on the floor and our armbar controlled hand across our lap. Or we could sit up and we could cross our feet and sort of catch our partner's far shoulder and wedge it in place with closed legs. And this is a very good control. When we do this, it takes away certain things from our partner. Like it's going to be harder for them to hit hitchhiker escapes because there's a closed wedge under the far shoulder. So personally for me, I love crossing my feet when I attack arm bars from the top. It's one of my favorite ways to do it, but there's still awesome advantages to leaning left or right. And really, to be a master arm bars, you have to have game from all these positions. There is no one is better than the other. There's just pros and cons, right? There's benefits and limitations to everything in jiu-jitsu. All right, let's talk about like different families of arm bars. Again, don't get mad if I miss a few because, like I said, this is a huge topic. It's vast. There's so many different ways to arm lock someone. I'm going to do my best to talk about different families of arm bars and different configurations. If you have things that you know in the comments that I didn't think of in this episode, I'd love for you guys to comment because I want to hear about it. Okay, so first one's Jujigatame. We talked about this. We're now shaped like a T, right? And I'm making a cross shape, hence the term cross shoulder hold. I'm controlling my partner's shoulders. I'm attacking the arm. I am perpendicular to my partner's spine. We all know this, right? It could be from the top position where we're in a spider web. It could be from the guard where I just threw up an armbar from the guard and now I am attacking an armbar from the guard. We could use a lat juji, and this is where we're now going to talk about different grip configurations. So instead of controlling my partner's wrist with my hands, I now have my partner's wrist wedged under my armpit, and I'm usually grabbing my own leg and reinforcing my leg as a wedge with my arm. And this position is deadly. We could do this from, we can hit it from the guard. We can hit it from different positions. Maybe one of the most notable positions would be from the clamp position where we kind of hip out and make a dominant angle from the closed guard. And then we also have Udigatame. Udigatame, also known as a straight arm lock or an inverted arm lock. You know, this would be like, imagine you had closed guard on someone and you managed to get double unders, and now you hip out into a clamp-like position, and your partner's wrist is now wedged onto your shoulder. And so you're pinching your partner's wrist with your ear and shoulder, and you're going to be applying pressure downward onto their elbow. So it's like an upside down arm bar from the guard. Now we've talked about some different families. Let's talk about one of the most important concepts that I've learned about arm bars. And these concepts are, again, there's parallels to this concept in leg locks as well. And this is going to be the idea of a bridging finish versus a pressing finish. And a pressing finish, the Danaher squad calls that the Magnum armbar, Magnum finish. Bridging finish is the classic way that we talk about finishing an armbar. You know, pinch your knee. What do we tell beginners? Pinch our knees, pull our heels to our butt, and bridge, and the arm gets broken. Okay, great. Magnum finish is where we are actually not using a bridging finish at all. We're not even using our hips, but we are now using our two hands in a bench press like configuration on our partner's wrist, and we are breaking the arm around our leg. Okay. Now, why would we do one or the other? And what are the pros and cons of both? Well, a bridging finish is probably easier to get. It requires less, I would say it requires a little bit less movement. It's a little bit less complicated, but the finishing potential, the breaking potential of a Magnum finish is much greater, because in a Magnum finish, we have all this range of motion. For those of you just listening, I'm just doing like this bench press movement where I'm pushing and extending my arms and my hands outward, and sort of mimicking breaking someone's arm around a post or a pole. That would actually be my hip. When would we use one or the other? Well, a bridging finish is fine in most cases. You can finish people with this finish most of the time, but there's certain scenarios where it's going to be difficult to use a bridging finish. One example is when you're getting stacked from the guard. So if I'm getting stacked and my back is on the floor, it's going to be hard for me to create the extension I need. This is why coming up on top when you're defending an armbar is a good idea, because you can now stack your opponent, bend their body into a concave position, and make it challenging for them to create full extension and break the arm. And when this happens, instead of trying to bridge and finish, we can take our partner's arm and sort of turn it and bend it around the corner and press around our own leg to break the arm. And this would be the so-called Magnum finish. When we do this, again, it's very important to understand anytime you do an armbar and you want to exert force into the armbar to break it, you basically have to push the arm in the opposite direction of where the thumb is posting, if that makes sense. So if I was going to attack a normal armbar, generally what I tell the kids is, okay, point the thumb up, right? They're in the top side armbar, thumb is pointing up. Okay, we're going to pull down on the hand and hip up through the elbow. Armbar happens, pretty basic, right? But then you go against some more, a player who's better at defending and they're stacking you, and you can no longer finish like this because you're getting stacked. Your body's compressed. And so what we do is we would actually take our partner's thumb and turn it to the side, and then we're going to push into the opposite direction of where that thumb is pointing from the side, right? We can do this in different situations. Another situation where the Magnum armbar is so important, and I've made a video on YouTube about this, the classic armbar defensive video from ADCC where Fabricio Verdum has Vinny Magalhaes in an armbar and he just can't finish it. I've done a breakdown of this, why the armbar didn't work. I'll include it in the show notes so you guys can watch it if you want. But this armbar was so tight and Fabricio's cranking on it. And it's like, why isn't this working? There's actually a couple reasons why it wasn't working. One of them was because Vinny, his arm is extended and he's turning away. He's turning away. And so when you're turning away from the armbar, a funny thing happens. Your shoulder actually elevates. And when the shoulder elevates, now you are required to have more follow through with your break. Another way you could look at this is you're now required to have a taller fulcrum point. The point that you're breaking your partner's arm now needs to be higher, right? Or it needs to be even firmer. So if we're here and I'm just facing the ceiling, you're armbarring me, you could totally use a standard finish. But if I start looking away from you, you'll notice that when you get on your side and you're defending an armbar looking away from your opponent, your shoulder will rise off the ground like a good 3 or 4 inches. And so now this has to be accounted for the person trying to finish the armbar. So now standard bridging finishes just usually aren't going to cut it. Okay. And this is a weird defense. It's counterintuitive to turn away from the arm that is fully extended and about to get broken, but it actually does buy you a little bit of extra time to defend. Another person who used this very, very well was Nick Rodriguez when he fought Big Dan Monasoyu, and he turned away and it was a crazy exchange. I think it was Fight Pass Invitational, or I think it was Fight Pass Invitational. And he managed to escape that armbar in like an EBI style overtime round, and it looked like his arm was fully going to get broken, and he turned away from it and he's twisting, turning. He was kind of using a dilemma between like what I call an omoplata escape, where he's looking away and turning his arm, and also like a hitchhike style escape. So he's going back and forth and eventually he gets out. And when your opponent turns away on you like this, you cannot just bridge and finish a good opponent. It's just not possible. So what you need to do is switch into a Magnum armbar where you can actually press the arm around the corner. So it doesn't matter that your back is on the ground or if your body's getting compressed. It doesn't matter if their shoulder is higher. You can still finish by breaking around the corner. I will link that breakdown in the show notes because I think it's first of all, it's an amazing submission escape. Vinny escapes, spoiler alert. But it's a great learning lesson as to how we can apply arm bars better. And a solution for that arm bar would be the Magnum finish. I had mentioned that there is parallels between this and leg locks. And maybe one day when, I think I've talked about it on the Outside Ashy episode I did, but I am planning on doing some premium content, and leg locks is for sure going to be in the premium episodes. But one of the biggest things that helped me finish outside heel hooks was if I'm belly up or belly down. If I'm belly up, generally the ground is behind me, and now bridging finishes become more difficult. When I'm belly down, I can bridge into the ground, no problem. There's no wedge behind me, the ground, impeding my bridge. So when I'm flat back to the floor and my opponent's standing over me and I have an outside heel hook, I need to use rotational finish. And so it's a completely different type of finishing mechanic. And this is very, very similar to what I'm talking about, bridging finishes versus pressing Magnum finishes. And so you must learn Magnum arm bars if you're going to be a master of arm bars, right? So generally, if my partner is doing that Vinny Magalesh escape where he's looking away and his shoulder's high, I'm going to grab the wrist, turn it so that it's palm up. These veins, as Danaher says, the veins on your wrist that you want to cut if you're trying to kill yourself. Guy's a weirdo, but I love him. Those veins need to face up, and then you're going to bend the arm around the corner, move the hand off center, move your head out of the way, and then break around your hip. Okay. Great. Let's also discuss a rule that is so important. I love teaching it in fundamentals class. I even teach it to kids, even though sometimes kids have problems with left and right. It really makes them think about left and right. And that's the right on right on right rule. This is Danaher stuff. I got to credit him for sure. Right on right rule. What does that mean? Well, if you have a standard juji, a traditional arm bar, and you're wondering where should we break this arm, if you're attacking the right arm, you want to break the right arm over your right hip. Don't break the right arm over the left hip because then they can hitchhike or escape. You want to break the right arm over the right hip, bring their right hand over your right shoulder, right? So there's a great rule when you're attacking with a standard arm bar, right on right on right. Obviously, conversely, left on left on left if you're attacking the left arm. This is a very, very important rule to understand. One thing that I always have guys, and I've had this issue too, is guys will be like, dude, whenever I go for an arm bar, I'm hurting my balls. Like I'm getting my balls caught in the arm bar. I used to be the same thing. You know why? It's because you're using your balls as a finishing fulcrum, and that is not what you should fucking do. You should be attacking your partner's right arm over your right hip. So if you look down between your legs, you have your hip bones here, right? Your pelvis. The right side is the fulcrum to break the right arm. Left side is the fulcrum to break the left arm. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule. We're going to now talk about different armbar configurations. So we talked about some different families of arm bars. This is sort of along the same lines. You know, get the fuck down, my cat, man. This guy, you know, cats are great, but they just fucking ruin everything. They jump up. This is, I guess, armbar configurations and armbar families are kind of synonymous, I guess, however you want to break it down, right? There's the classic armbar configuration where you have your two legs across your partner. This is the Juji Gatame, right? And then there's what Danaher calls the quarter armbar. And this would be where your leg over your partner's torso is now tucked under their armpit. There's less control for a quarter juji, but a lot of time when you spin into arm bars from top positions, this is where you land, in the quarter juji. And then you can finish from this position, but there is less control. Generally, when we go to quarter juji, we want to throw our leg over into a full juji. And then there's three-quarter armbar. So three-quarter juji is where we have like our torso leg is now buddying up with the leg that's over the head, and both legs are now over our partner's face. Sort of like we're setting up a triangle, okay? And then there's different variations like scissor arm bars where your torso leg is now behind your partner's head and your crossface leg is over the top, like you're scissoring their head off. Pillow arm bar where you have 2 feet underneath your partner's head. There's so many variations of arm bars. And do we need to name them all? Eco guys don't think we do. And honestly, I don't really think we need to either. But I think it's important when we're like, just so we have language that can differentiate. And I can say, okay, do a scissor juji. And you're like, okay, I know what that means. It means the feet are wrapped around the head like a pair of scissors, cutting the head off, right? So it's just easier to classify these submissions, I think. Generally, the right on right rule is true for all jujis until we get to 3/4 arm bars and triangle arm bars, as well as scissor. If you're going to do like a scissor arm bar, again, right on right rule works. Pillow arm bar, same thing, right on right works. But when we go into 3/4 arm bars, that is when we actually break this rule. 3/4 arm bars and triangle arm bars, the right arm gets broken over the left hip now. This is a very interesting thing. Something happens when the crossface leg moves to a different position. Now you'll find that it's actually the other hip that we're going to break over. So if you ever have somebody in a triangle and you're trying to armbar them at the same time, if you're attacking their right arm, break it over the left hip. Okay. There's also a couple of awesome armbar configurations like stomp jujis. This is something I just learned from watching Gordon's armbar DVD, and it's fucking awesome. I've never thought about doing this before I saw him do it, and I'm pretty sure he did it against Roberto Jimenez, where basically instead of doing like a scissor style armbar, we're actually stomping our own foot. So if I had my leg, my torso leg wrapped behind someone's head like a scissor armbar, instead of throwing my other leg over, often this can allow my opponent to catch that arm and now sit up and control that lever and start to defend. We just stomp our 2 feet down to the floor. So I just like reinforce my other foot and chop it down. And when you do that, your opponent has very little ability to sit up and gain height. And if they can't gain height, as we talked about, it's very difficult for them to escape arm bars. So stomp jujis are very, very effective. I love stomping my feet now. It's actually one of my favorite ways to set up a Magnum armbar. There's also what Danaher and Gordon call shoulder senkaku. This is where you're locking basically a triangle with your legs over your partner's shoulder. And you could lock it with a triangle facing the legs. You could lock it with a triangle facing your partner's head. Again, guys, I can't visually show you guys these moves from where you're listening to this episode. I would recommend you guys check out Gordon's armbar DVD or even Danaher's Enter the System armbars. You're going to get some awesome details out of that and watch them do it. They teach it much better than me, right? I'm stealing all my shit from the best guys. That's why I'm just trying to like break it down in podcast form. So again, a big mistake people make, I think, with shoulder senkaku is they lock a triangle and they expect that to just maintain a strong wedge around your partner's arm. And the truth is, when you lock a triangle, there's actually quite sizable space in between your knees. And this actually will allow them to slip their elbow out. So instead of actually locking a true triangle, I prefer almost crossing ankles. Kind of like if you had saddle on somebody. If you have triangled legs when you attack the saddle, often your wedges will be quite weak because a triangle means that the space between your knees is quite open. But when you scissor your legs and just cross your ankles, or Gordon sometimes calls that a semi-senkaku, semi-triangle. When you just cross your feet and pinch your knees together, actually it really tightens your wedges. So when I do shoulder senkaku, I really want to like scissor my legs so that I have that opposing force coming underneath my opponent's elbow and it's wedging in place. And then again, I always prefer a Magnum finish for these types of arm bars. Generally now, ever since I learned Magnum arm bars is like my go-to. It's kind of how I like to finish arm bars because I know going against good opponents, good black belts, like you're going to need to have that extra follow through. You're going to need to actually be able to break, not just pop the arm, but break it. Right. So that's where that's where the Magnum arm bar is very, very important. And of course there's a couple of other types of arm bars that are completely that are out of nowhere, like choi bars and things like this, arm saddles. So we should mention choi bars and arm saddles because it's like a completely different type of entry or a different type of avenue of arm bars. But again, it all usually turns into one of these classic arm bar situations in the end, right? For those of you who don't know what a choi bar is basically where you're in like a bottom knee shield and you kind of wedge your partner's wrist in between your ear and shoulder, and then you fire your knee and then chop your knee down over your partner's shoulder. This acts as a posture breaking mechanism. And then you throw your leg inside inside their armpit through to the other side. There's different ways we can do it. We can use it with Kimura control, adding a Kimura control so that we get even more control. And then from here, we can choose to take the back. We can choose to enter triangles. A great DVD for that is Kieran Kachuk. He's got a great half guard DVD where he talks about getting into like choi bar scenarios. And he also has a really good triangle DVD. I haven't watched it yet, but I do have it. I'm meaning to watch that. I'm sure he talks about, these types of combinations where we're entering arm saddles and going into triangles and things like that. Arm saddle, again, is basically just, it's like the position you get to from the choi bar where you lace your leg through and underneath your partner's chest through to the far side. It's one of the strongest armbar positions you can really use, in my opinion. All right, let's talk about adding arm bars to other systems. Anytime we're attacking Kimuras, triangles, and omoplatas, we will have opportunities to switch off to arm bars and vice versa. Okay, these moves all kind of blend together, and yeah, it's really important that we understand the relationship between all of them. And if you favor one more than the other, you need to know how to get to those submissions. Need to know when, if the submission is not working, when we should let go and switch off to another system. I already said, anytime you got someone in a triangle, we break the right on right rule. We're now taking the right arm and breaking it over the left hip. Generally, anytime I have someone in a triangle armbar, if they're posturing up, I go for the armbar. If they're stacking me, I go for the triangle. This is kind of a dilemma-based thing when you're attacking triangle armbars. We're attacking a Kimura. Again, I just mentioned how we can get into arm saddle. If you have like a Kimura from a knee shield and you lock onto a good Kimura, you can throw your leg over the top, lace it through, boom, you're in the arm saddle. Now we can start going into triangles and finishing arm locks and all triangles, all types of things from there. And then omoplata, everyone shits on omoplata for being like a move that it's very hard to submit people from. It's true, but it's a very, very effective position to put an omoplata on someone because it is the power of your two legs versus their one arm. So it scales really well against big opponents. And anytime I get an omoplata, I'm basically looking to go armbar because there is some truth to the idea that you cannot easily finish a good opponent with an omoplata. But if you get someone in omoplata and you triangle your legs the other way, you can hit awesome rolling arm bars. You can roll through and attack arm bars, and you're going to end up in some variation of shoulder senkaku if you attack an arm bar from the omoplata position. So very, very important to know when we're attacking these other submissions where an arm is involved, triangle, Kimura, omoplata, that we're always thinking about how can we maybe turn this into an armbar. That's how I look at it. And anytime I'm attacking a triangle, I'm always thinking about that arm that's right there. Another great submission that's maybe underappreciated from triangles is wrist locks because your partner's elbow is completely wedged. Remember the 3-joint rule that we talked about earlier in the episode? Anytime we want to attack our opponent's joint, we isolate the joint above that joint. And when you have someone in a triangle, that means they are perfect environment to start attacking our partner's wrist. So yeah, make sure that you're thinking about arm bars, not just as individual techniques, but how can we incorporate them into other systems? How can we join different systems and simultaneously attack Kimuras with arm bars? I will say this, because it's pretty, I would say it's pretty expected that attacking an armbar from the top position of Juji with a Kimura control would be like totally overpowering. It would be like an unstoppable combination. But the truth is, when somebody has a when someone has a Kimura armbar when they're attacking from a topside Juji, there is one huge weakness, and that's that two arms are now dedicated to attacking one of your arms. So it's very, very strong, and its benefit is that the control is no longer relying upon your opponent's legs. When your opponent has you in an armbar with a Kimura, their legs can be open and you still can't easily escape the position because the Kimura is internally rotating your arm. And so the legs can be in different configurations. We can use Kimura arm bars with our legs moving around into different configurations without our opponent being able to move because of the internal rotation of the shoulder. That's the benefit of the Kimura armbar. The disadvantage of the Kimura armbar is you do not have a hand to post on. And when you do not have a hand to post, when you're attacking an armbar, that means the bottom player is always going to have an easier time coming up, bridging, and getting on top. And I always look for these things. I could do an episode on armbar defense. It's such a vast topic again. Whenever I'm stuck in an armbar, I always look at what my opponent has. If they attack me with a Kimura armbar, I know that I'm not going to be able to do a hitchhiker escape because the arm is completely locked out. Same thing with a three-quarter armbar or like a triangle armbar. There is no hitchhiker escape because of the wedging going on. Okay, so that's very important to understand. Same when my partner has their feet crossed. There's no hitchhiker escape. But if my opponent has a Kimura armbar, I know that they do not have a hand available to post on the ground. And so bridging up and coming on top is actually a pretty good answer. So they would have to let go of the arm and post to prevent the bridge. And so we can get our head higher than our opponent's head when we're defending. We can start stacking them and making it very, very difficult for them to actually finish this Kimura armbar. But like I said, the benefits of Kimura armbars is that now your opponent's legs can move into triangles, Yoko Senkaku, side triangles, what that means. Bunch of different positions, and so it's just such good control for them to transition into other systems and throw different dilemmas at you. You guys still with me? We're getting there. We're almost done. Now let's just talk about basic grip breaking. So, in terms of the order of operations for arm bars, we need to enter the armbar, right? That's like kind of the first thing. Get to the armbar position, get connection to your partner's shoulder girdle, and enter the quote armbar, arm lock, juji, whatever you want to call it. Now we have to maintain this position. So we have to maintain our connection to our partner's shoulders while they're freaking out. They're moving around. Maybe we're going upside down. We're spinning around 360 degrees. Now I've done that. I need to make sure that I can unlock my opponent's arms, right? I got in, I can control it now. And for long periods of time, I have to unlock my opponent's arms. A big mistake that a lot of beginners will do is their opponent's arms will be locked in different configurations, whatever, and they start leaning back like they're trying to finish the armbar. This is not the time to lean back. We do not lean back when our opponent's arms are locked. Stay seated, stay wedged, sit forward, connect your torso to your partner's arm. Okay, generally, anytime I finish an armbar, I want to connect their arm to my torso so that I'm not using so much my arms to finish, but I'm just connecting it to my body. But make sure that you are not falling back when the hands are locked because you're almost leaving the hands behind. Sit up and connect yourself to the hands, to your partner's arm. Now is the action of separating the hands. So how are we going to break the grip? We have to do this before we do the final stage, which is the finishing mechanics, right? We talked about Magnum arm bars and bridging arm bars and all that. So how are we going to break grips? There's different ways. Again, it depends on what my opponent's giving me. Anytime my opponent gives me a 10-finger grip, palm-to-palm grip, wrist-to-wrist grip, generally what I look to do is go to the cross-chest position. And this is where I'm kind of, if you can imagine me putting my partner's arm in Americana, this is kind of, in my opinion, the best way to break someone's grip. It's not the only way. There are other ways to do it, but I think this is one of the best ways. Because when your partner's arm is bent in an Americana position, we're now using the small muscles in their rotator cuff to try and hold this grip. When your partner's arms are, or should I say, when your spine is parallel with your partner's arms, if you can imagine attacking an armbar when they're palm to palm, if you just lean straight back, you can pull as hard as you want. Even someone who is smaller than you will be able to keep their hands locked, right? And so what we want to do is, again, we think about the right on right rule. If I'm attacking my partner's right arm, I'm going to cup their right elbow and pull it to my right hip. Just this action alone will stop the hitchhiker escape. So important, I'll say it again. If you don't want your partner to hitchhike on you, pull your partner's right arm, you're attacking their right arm, pull their right elbow to your right hip. They will not be able to hitchhike if you do it properly. Then take your left arm and wrap it around your partner's wrist. Wrap it elbow deep, so your elbow is in contact with their wrist, and start to pull it into the cross chest position. So you'll have their elbow glued to one of your hips and the wrist glued to the other, and then you're going to start falling towards their head. All right, so you're connected to the arm and we're falling towards the head. One thing Gordon talks about is a kip. Honestly, I haven't found it super necessary, but it certainly does work. And that's where you kind of like kip, 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 kip. That's the kind of cadence you try to break the grip with. Instead of just leaning and pulling in one big movement, we're kind of like kipping, kipping, kipping. So every time you're doing this kip movement, it's creating disconnection with your partner and it's jarring their shoulder joint until eventually the grip breaks. Then you level out and you do either a bridging finish or a pressing finish, right? It's incredibly useful. It's one of the best grip breaks ever. It's easy to teach to beginners and kids. It's kind of my all-purpose grip whenever somebody uses a palm-to-palm or wrist-to-wrist. Alternatively, we could try to cross our legs over the clasp of their hands. If their hands are really, really close to their body, generally that's what I'll do is I'll just throw my leg over the top and lock a triangle with my legs, and then I'll just lean back, and usually this separates the hands pretty good. If we want to look at separating the actual break of the clasp of the hands, again, there's a lot of different ways we could do this, right? So how do we memorize the perfect grip break for every situation? It doesn't really exist, right? Instead, this is where I really am with Greg and the Eco guys. It's like you got to play in that position so many times and kind of try to look at the clasp of the hands and organize yourself to do it in the most efficient ways possible. And so I don't think memorizing actual grip breaks is the best way. I think thinking about concepts and training yourself to like see what your opponent has in front of you and then just reacting to the environment, that is the best way you're going to get grip breaks. But one concept I love is always attacking the pad of the thumb. This is something Gordon talks about. So you could be attacking with your top side arm or your bottom side arm. Your partner's hands could be clasped right over the top or left over the top, right? And so like, what am I going to do? Look at this situation with the hands and be like, oh, what was the best way to attack the left arm on top with my top side arm in from a 3/4? Like, no, you don't have time to think about stuff like that. You have to be able to just know, because you've been in that situation so many times, and you can look at the arms and you can see what will make that arm weak, and you can see where the grip break will come. One thing we want to do that is incredibly effective, in my opinion, is attacking the pad of the thumb. And so for those just listening, you won't be able to see it, but for those watching right now, if you were to look at my left hand, I'm protecting the pad of my thumb with my right hand. But the underside here, my thumb, is unguarded. And so from here, we could come in and peel that grip off. Conversely, if my hands were switched, it would be the same idea. I'm now protecting my right hand with my left, so you can't attack my thumb here, but you could come underneath and attack my left thumb, peel it away, and then again, try and get to the cross chest position and kip and break the grip and then go into your finish, right? If the hands are figure forward, so what if your opponent has figure forward hands? Again, everything has a strength and a weakness. And just like anything in life, there's always pros and cons to every decision you make, right? In this situation, if your opponent chooses to defend with a figure four grip, you are not able to do the cross chest position. It's not possible because your partner's arm, the lever that you're trying to control, is now hidden behind a wedge, and that hand is now wedging in behind your cross-faced leg. So it's structurally a very, very strong position for your opponent and very difficult to extract the arm that you're trying to break. But there is a super easy way to break this grip. Generally, what I do is I just put a placeholder on top of the hand that is underneath the cross-faced leg, and then I just take my leg off the head for a split second, move the hand out of the way, and then I replace the crossface leg. It seems like it wouldn't work, but it totally does work. And now you have your partners. Now you're controlling your partner's secondary defensive hand with your hand that you just extracted. And so we can prevent our partner now from locking their hands together by just sort of parrying the hand. I don't know how to even describe it, to prevent the hands from making contact again. Whenever I separate my partner's hands, I'm hand fighting them. I usually will have one hand through the arm that I'm trying to break, and then my other hand that just separated the hands is kind of just parrying and preventing them from locking their hands. So as long as my hand is parrying and in between their hands that are trying to connect, they can't connect their hands, and then I just lean back and finish the armbar, right? Or whatever I'm going to do. So yeah, that's a great grip break for the figure four. Just put a placeholder on top of the top hand, move your leg off of their head, move the hand out of the way, and then replace the crossface leg. Usually I'll cross my legs at this point, and then I'll just keep the hands from reconnecting. And we're in like our final phases of arm bars. So guys, that was a crash course on arm bars. I did it in under an hour. I'm actually kind of impressed. There's so much more to arm bars. I don't want you guys thinking that like I covered everything, because I just didn't. It's just not possible. Arm bars is such a vast topic, like I said, and I should do more episodes about it in the future. But if I miss some things, please put it in the comment section, guys. I would really, really appreciate it. Also, I should let you know what I'm doing. So again, I'm back into super fight this weekend. It's going to be Fight to Win Vancouver, I believe. I believe it's going down. I don't even know where this event is taking place yet, but for the first time ever, Fight to Win is scheduled to come to Vancouver. It doesn't come to Canada very often, and I'm super excited about this. My opponent is Corey Guittard, who is a black belt from 10th Planet Calgary. He's got some size on me. I think he's 200 pounds. I'm walking around at like 185. I'm a short dude. I'm 5'8" generously. So I'm like, going against a 200 pounder, I should be fighting at like lightweight, truthfully, or featherweight. But I'm fat and I'm 36 now, and I don't really feel like being anorexic. So I'm trying to fill out my frame a little bit more. And from what I understand, my opponent has very good front headlocks. One of my students, Harrison Woods, fought him. He heel hooked Corey. So, I'm looking forward to the match, especially after my dog shit performance the other week at Battle Mats against Lucas. I'm looking forward to get back out there and trying my best. And again, you know what? Like, even if win or lose, it to me, it's all just for fun, and it's all, at this point in my career, I'm just doing this because I'm enjoying, the last couple of years that I can be competitive with some of the top guys. So I really appreciate the opportunity to compete. Anytime I compete, it's kind of like when I had Josh McKinney on the show, we were talking about competing, and he was saying, just be grateful. Even it might be the last time you ever compete again. And if it is, be grateful for that opportunity. Right. And when he said that, I was like, man, you're so right. Like, who knows if I can, maybe I'll never compete again after this. This might be the last time. So win or lose, I'd rather go out there and just try and see how good I can do. It's a 6-minute match. It's a short match. That's really fucking short, especially if the last competition, potential 15-minute matches, this is a short match. And I don't care if he's bigger than me. That to me doesn't matter at all. I remember after Battle Mats, I had a lot of people messaging me, and they're like, oh, it wasn't fair. Like, Lucas had the harder path to the gold, and he had more rest than you. And, you had less rest in between matches. Maybe these things are true, but I never once would accept that excuse. Like, whenever they say that to me, I'm like, no, like, he was the better fighter. He hit me on, he wore me out in regulation. He hit a nice wrestle up in overtime. It was successful. I turtled to avoid the score. He took my back. I made some bad decisions from there. I was very tired, and he choked me out. And like, there's no excuses. Like, if I agreed to fight my opponent who's bigger than me, it's because I think that I can beat him. Right. So if I lose to Corey Guittard, it's because I wasn't as good at him as him. That's all there is to it. You can't control certain things like the seating of the brackets or the rest between fights. You can't control certain things. So, guys, don't make excuses if you fucking lose is all I can say. Nobody cares. Just think like, okay, why did I lose? And how can I make it? How can I adjust things for next time? And that's how I think competitors should look at it. Nobody should be looking at making excuses to try and soften the loss for them. No, own it and fucking get better. And that's all there is to it. The real ones will understand what I'm saying. If you start making excuses for yourself, you're not helping yourself at all. You're just feeding your ego. Oh, I could have won if I had a bigger breakfast that day. I could have won. If we whatever. It doesn't fucking matter, dude. Just compete and just try your best. And if you lose, try to make some adjustments. Anyway, guys, that was my episode on arm bars, and I hope you guys got some value out of it. Beginners, intermediate, advanced. Don't care who you are. Hope you got some value out of it. Again, I really recommend that you check out Gordon and Danaher. They have some excellent instructionals on arm bars. Very beneficial for me. And if you're still with me and you want to support the show, check out the links in the bottom. I do have some premium content coming your guys' way. I don't know when it's going to be. Honestly, I'm very, very busy running the gym and getting ready for competitions. Getting Lincoln Costello ready for ADCC Kids Worlds. That's going to take place in August, in a few short weeks, actually. Very excited for that. And but I will be getting some premium content out, and I will let you guys know how you can support by subscribing to that content. It's going to be a series on like gym ownership, managing a gym, coaching kids, leg locks, all a variety of different topics. If you guys have particular topics you want me to talk about, please send me an email. Please message me on Instagram. Again, links are in the bottom. And of course, if you want to support the show, there's a bunch of links to my products and offerings in the bottom. And I really appreciate all of your guys' support. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, leave comments. Guys, that is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. The Everyday Jiu-Jitsu Podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu-Jitsu. Peace.